The stars died in silence. There were no flashes, no heat, no glorious battles. The null plague didn't kill with fire, it unmade with stillness. Cells simply stopped. Plants curled inward. Oceans dulled. Animals laid down mid-stride as if sleeping. And entire civilizations, worlds with histories, crumbled into dust without a scream. On Earth they called it the Fade. No origin, no cure, no warning. Only one known fact. It was engineered. Something sent this, and it was designed with impossible precision to target life's will to live. It struck Earth's outer colonies first, then Luna, then low orbit. Within 40 days, major cities were ghost tombs. And deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, inside the Haven 7 survival complex, a medic named Leah Arden watched the last of her squad fade away on a cot beside her. They died with eyes open, lungs intact, hearts steady, just gone. No struggle. Just the body deciding there was no point. She'd felt it too at first. The weight, the quiet voice whispering, "Why try? It's easier to stop. Just sleep." She nearly did, but somewhere in her chest, under the nausea and despair, something flared like a knife through fog. Anger, the raw animal kind. And that's when the virus made its first mistake. It tried to break Leah Arden's survival instinct, but it didn't know what it was dealing with. 4 days after infection, she should have been a husk like the others. Instead, she was sweating bullets, hallucinating memories from childhood, and clawing her way to the med bay to scrawl a message in blood across the quarantine window. "I'm still here." Doctors ran tests. They couldn't believe it. Her cells were flooded with null plague, but they were fighting back, not producing antibodies, not resisting, attacking, punching holes in the virus, isolating strands, disobeying orders written into death itself. The virus was self-correcting in other hosts, adjusting, adapting. But in her, it was fracturing, dying, like it couldn't figure her out, like it was scared. The senior virologist, Dr. K. Rammel, said it in a whisper during a conference call with the last global labs. "It's not acting like a plague. It's acting like an animal cornered in a cage." Leah couldn't walk for a week. She screamed through dreams that weren't hers. She remembered her father's funeral, a boy she left behind in Kandahar, a dying dog on a highway. But the pain didn't crush her. It anchored her. Somehow, her body was feeding that pain into her immune system, trauma as fuel, memory as fire. Something deeply human was rewriting her biology into a weapon the virus had never prepared for. 3 weeks later, she stood on her own. The virus was still in her blood, but now it was quiet, muted, dormant, trapped. She carried it like a chain around her neck, and it was learning what fear felt like. Leah Arden walked into the observation chamber where 6 others lay fading. She touched the hand of Private Rin Salazar, barely breathing. Within 12 hours, he stirred. By morning, he was sitting up. By nightfall, his bioscan matched hers. And when, he cried, so did she. Something had transferred, something alive, not medicine, not an antidote. Something angrier, stronger. "You're contagious," Dr. Rammel said quietly, but not like before. Leah leaned against the wall, her face pale, her eyes glowing faintly beneath her skin like flickering embers. "Good," she said. "Let's start a goddamn outbreak." It had no name. It wasn't a creature or machine, not really. It was a construct, a bio-algorithm embedded in protein architecture, seeded with fail-safes and adaptive logic. The Imperium had poured 10,000 years of war into designing it. The null plague did not think, but it responded. And when it encountered Leah Arden, it did something it had never done before. It hesitated. In the hidden vaults of Haven 7, Leah, stood under sterilized lights, hands trembling, sweat burning cold lines down her spine. Her blood sample was projected in 3D across the lab, millions of her own cells attacking the viral strands like wolves circling a wounded beast. The virus's usual behavior, spread, suppress, silence, was gone. What remained inside her looked like a digital cornered animal, twisting and rewriting itself in broken loops. It tried to override her limbic system, but it couldn't get in. Tried to force cellular shutdown, but her cells had reinforced their own death pathways with a mirror of her emotional state. Dr. Rammel stared at the projections with wide, glassy eyes. It's mimicking her now. It's trying to survive by becoming more human. "Let it try," Leah said through gritted teeth. "It doesn't know what we do to monsters who copy our skin." Elsewhere, across broken satellites and burnt relay stations, the Imperium watched. Their scout AIs had flagged Earth as a failed node, full infection, low threat, total extinction within prediction curve. But then came the anomaly. Encrypted Terran broadcasts began repeating fragments of Leah's recovered vitals, the Lazarus Pulse, the scientists called it, proof of cellular defiance, a global beacon of resurrection. It was supposed to be impossible. The Imperium took notice. "They are adapting," said the biostrategist Venak. "We programmed the virus to extinguish life, not fight its will. We did not account for this." The Imperium's command council dismissed the worry. One human is not a threat. They were wrong, because Leah Arden was no longer just one human. Private Rin Salazar stood next to her now, pale but upright. His eyes, too, flickered with faint light beneath the skin. They shared the Lazarus strain, though no one understood how it passed. Blood contact, proximity, emotion. Maybe it wasn't a pathogen anymore. Maybe it was an idea. In the med bay, 2 more infected patients had begun to stir after Leah's touch. One of them whispered a word that hadn't been heard. In weeks, hope. Later that night, Leah sat alone in her quarantine chamber, breathing in the silence. The lights were dim. She stared at her reflection in the reinforced glass, half expecting to see something alien, but it was still her, still human. The virus pulsed inside her like a caged snake. It had stopped trying to kill her. Now it was just watching, studying. "You didn't expect this, did you?" she whispered. "You thought we'd lie down. Go quietly." A memory came unbidden. Her brother's face, pale from chemo, still grinning through the pain. He was 9 when he told her, "I'm not scared, not if you're with me." That moment, the sheer weight of it, pressed through her chest like a second heartbeat. She opened her hand, and in her palm, her blood glowed faint gold. The virus had adapted, so had she, but only one of them knew what to do with pain. In a sealed report, Dr. Rammel recorded a final entry. "The null plague has hit a wall. It's changing, but not fast enough. Leah isn't just surviving, she's shaping it. The human will to endure is becoming biological. This isn't evolution. This is a message." The last sentence chilled her. "The virus is beginning to mirror human trauma. And I believe, God help me, it's starting to feel fear." The dead didn't lie in coffins anymore. There weren't enough trees left to make them, and there wasn't enough time. In the wastelands outside Haven 7, the survivors didn't dig. They stood their dead upright, shoulders braced by steel. Poles, eyes open to the sky. It wasn't superstition, it was defiance. Leah Arden stood among them now, her breath misting in the freezing dawn, surrounded by a forest of corpses who had refused to kneel. Soldiers, nurses, civilians, all fade victims. All still upright. Not because they would come back, but because their memory dared the virus to try again. "We bury them standing," Leah whispered, "so the world knows we never fell." The Lazarus strain was spreading, not like a normal virus. No airborne particles, no blood cultures. This wasn't science anymore. It was willpower, contagious and alive. A dozen survivors had been stabilized in Haven 7. All of them had touched Leah. Most had cried. All had survived. They weren't just immune now. They were different. Their vitals ran hotter. Their reflexes sharpened. Their scans pulsed with neural patterns that looked more like combat alertness than recovery. A few began dreaming of lives that weren't theirs, memories they'd never lived, Leah's memories. The Lazarus strain wasn't just fighting death. It was uploading resistance. Dr. Rammel watched it all with quiet awe and rising fear. She compiled her latest analysis into a report she didn't dare send to the wider network, because the implications weren't safe. The strain is no longer biological. It's mimetic. It behaves like belief. And belief, she wrote, is far harder to kill. Leah visited the patients every day. She'd lost her squad, her sister, and most of her bodies. Original blood, but somehow she kept standing, kept moving, and her numbers, immune count, cell regeneration, even muscle mass kept increasing. She's not recovering, Rammel whispered. She's adapting. Word traveled beyond Haven 7. Signal drones launched coded pulses into orbit. Fragments of Leah's bioprofile, brainwave scans, before and after recordings. They called it the Lazarus Pulse. The idea was simple. We're not dead, we're evolving. And someone was listening. In low orbit, an old Skywatch relay picked up the signal. From there, it bounced across Earth's abandoned mesh, then out. To the shattered Martian colonies, Europa research bunkers, even drifting cargo wrecks. Humanity had no central command, no real infrastructure, but it had radios, and it had rage. A survivor bunker in Caracas received the pulse. So did a scavenger group hiding beneath the flooded ruins of Tokyo. So did a lone cosmonaut orbiting Saturn, weeping as his own death paused, reversed, retreated. Everywhere the pulse reached, something stirred. Not everyone survived. But those who did, they didn't come back the same, they came back ready. On the 100th day after the first infection, Leah led a team beyond the Haven 7 perimeter for the first time. No suits, no filters, just skin, steel, and eyes that burned like twin stars. The Imperium watched from afar. Their plague had worked perfectly for every other species, but not for the humans. They'd miscalculated. They'd built a weapon to destroy biological life. But humanity had long ago stopped being just biological. They'd infected a species built on resistance, on scars, on generations of stubborn survival. A species that learned from pain and shared it. The Lazarus strain wasn't just a cure now, it was a revolution in flesh and memory. Leah stood on the scorched remains of what was once Denver, beside the upright corpses of her fallen. Wind howled through skeletal towers, but she heard something else. Breathing. Survivors. And behind her, Rin Salazar spoke 5 words into the transmitter. Earth is not a grave. Project Lazarus wasn't created in a lab. It was born in the mud and wreckage, in whispered prayers and clenched fists, in the burning pulse of a woman who should have died but didn't. But once the scientists saw what Leah Arden had become, they did what humans always do in the face of the unknown. They weaponized it. Haven 7 transformed. The surviving engineers converted cryo chambers into growth pods. Autodoc systems were reprogrammed to replicate and infuse stem cultures based on Leah's altered genome. They extracted what they could: her blood, her spinal fluid, even micro-neural imprints, trying to isolate the trigger. They failed, because there wasn't one. It's not chemical, Dr. Rammel said. It's not genetic, at least not entirely. It's something older, something deeper. It doesn't live in her blood. It is her blood. So instead, they pivoted. If they couldn't build it, they'd clone the conditions. Project Lazarus became Humanity's first will-based biotech initiative. No serums, no syringes. Just exposure, imprint, and emotional proximity. Trauma triggers. Empathy overlays. It turned healing into a ritual. Leah didn't need to understand it to lead it. She just had to keep walking into the fire. The first Lazarus teams formed in the shadows of ruin, small strike units of semi-infected humans, immune to the null plague, radiating a field of psychological resistance that scrambled virus activity. They called themselves Standers. They recovered sealed bunkers, freed dying enclaves, and reactivated satellite relays. Their presence alone stabilized the dying. They didn't wear flags. They wore the sigil of the dead tree standing upright. Don't retreat, Leah told them, because our dead can't. The Imperium noticed. Scout drones swept low over Earth, mapping Lazarus' spread. They tracked Leah's movements, horrified by the pattern. Wherever she went, the fade stopped, spreading. Infected zones reversed. Organic matter reawakened. Trees began blooming through concrete. Even Earth's decaying biosphere stabilized. The virus wasn't just failing, it was retreating. They had to respond. From orbit, the Imperium dispatched sterilization drones, black spires of surgical light and plasma claws. No emotion, no negotiation. Just cold finality. They fell like thunderbolts across the Earth. The first attack hit Haven 3, a repopulated bunker near Greenland. 2 Lazarus teams died in the first strike. 39 civilians were reduced to bone and ash. The survivors didn't run. They broadcasted every second of the carnage on open frequencies, letting the Imperium watch Leah's face as she found the wreckage. And for the first time in Imperium history, an alien command node registered a psychic feedback spike from the null plague still hiding inside her. The virus remembered the shape of her grief, and it shuddered. Earth fought back. Crude missiles, repurposed lasers, even hand-thrown explosives. Humanity didn't have tech. What they had were people who wouldn't stay dead. Lazarus teams began intercepting drones mid-descent, sacrificing themselves to protect civilians only to reawaken minutes. Later, bones shattered, but alive. Pain was no longer a weakness. It was a fuel. Leah, covered in ash, bleeding from her nose, stood in the wreckage of Haven 3, broadcasting live. You built a virus to kill everything. But you forgot one thing. Humans don't break. We adapt. You wanted silence. We gave you. A scream. You wanted a grave. We gave you Project Lazarus. Elsewhere on Earth, survivors began carving those 2 words into walls, helmets, even their skin. Project Lazarus, it wasn't just a cure now. It was a war cry. The Imperium believed Earth was a closed system, a plague capsule, a final experiment in failure. They were wrong. The Lazarus pulse traveled through fractured satellite constellations, bleeding into old interplanetary comm lines, bouncing between Martian listening posts and Europa's cryo labs. At first it was just data, signals of resurrection, audio clips of voices rising from extinction. But something in those signals resonated. Something woke up, aboard the derelict RVS Antares, drifting. Above Venus for 6 months, a single survivor stirred from cryo. Her name was Engineer Imani Kepler. Last logged entry. Day 42 of the fade. Status: terminal exposure. She should have been dead. But as the Lazarus signal reached the ship, her vitals flickered. Her eyes shot open. She gasped. And then she screamed. Not in pain, but in rage. On Phobos, an old mining colony blinked back online. 6 dead workers lay in their bunks. Their neural implants began twitching. One, Samir Kadim, stood up and walked, bones cracking, skin gray, but his eyes shining with the same ember flame that now marked the Lazarus survivors. Across the system, life sparked. The virus had spread through ships and colonies like data. But now, the Lazarus strain was riding the same wave. whispering across dead space in the voices of the ones who refused to die. Everywhere it touched, it left echoes, and the virus began to feel them. The Imperium panicked. Inside their biothrones, the strategists argued, their genetic code was too stable, too clean, too cold. They had no concept of a virus evolving into belief. That was the realm of lower species. Contain Earth, one hissed. Block all signals. Cleanse the orbit. But the Null Plague's own behavior was changing. It was no longer just spreading. It was listening. Tracking Lazarus-bearing individuals. Pausing in the presence of grief. Some of its nodes refused to terminate hosts. Some began to replicate human brainwaves, memories, emotional residues. One of the Imperium's hive drones even spoke a human word during a scan. Why? Leah Arden stood on a scorched launch platform in Colorado. Her team had reactivated an old orbital delivery system, Project Backscatter. It was never meant for passengers, but Lazarus survivors didn't die easy. The plan was simple. Launch a 3-person Lazarus unit to a derelict orbital station. From there, hijack the signal relay and amplify the Lazarus pulse across the solar system. The risks were insane. So naturally, she volunteered first. As the capsule climbed, G-forces pressing down on her chest, Leah felt the virus inside her quiver. It wasn't attacking. It was watching, like a child trying to understand a parent's tears. Her fingers flexed against the seat. "You want to know what we are?" she whispered through gritted teeth. "We're not logical. We're not predictable. We don't do things because they make sense. We do them because they matter." And for the first time, something inside her, deep in her blood, in the lingering fragments of the virus, responded, not with silence, but with a memory. Not hers. She was a child again. But not Leah. A village on fire. Alien soldiers. A parent torn away. The terror wasn't hers. It belonged to the virus. To the early carriers it had infected. To the species it had devoured. They had suffered too. They had died begging. The virus had been engineered from extinction. Built on pain. Programmed to ensure no species would rise again as theirs had fallen. But now, it felt something new. Guilt. Above Earth, the orbital station loomed, dark and cold. As Leah docked, lights flickered on, systems untouched for decades, humming to life. She looked down at the pale blue planet. Her fingers hovered over the transmission command. Then she pressed it. The Lazarus pulse roared out across the solar system, stronger than ever before. On the command deck, Leah whispered to the watching stars, "We are the echo. We are the flame. We remember." And somewhere in the void, the virus, silent for so long, wept. While Leah soared beyond the atmosphere, the world she left behind began to change. Haven 7 was no longer a bunker. It was a cradle, a site of rebirth and reckoning. The Lazarus strain had spread to nearly every known survivor zone, not through infection, but through resonance. People touched by the virus didn't just recover. They remembered, not just their own lives, but echoes of others, strangers, martyrs. Whole lines of pain and endurance passed like torches from hand to hand. The survivors didn't call it hallucination. They called it inheritance. Commander Rin. Salazar stood watch over the perimeter, now ringed in upright statues of the dead. Their bodies desiccated, but preserved. Not burial, not display. Guardians. Children wandered among them, placing metal flowers at their feet. They knew these were not decorations. They were reminders. Rin watched the latest recruits, teenagers mostly, born after the Fade, wielding makeshift rifles and laser-scavenged tools. Their eyes burned with the same light he'd seen in Leah's when she first returned from her coma. These weren't kids anymore. They were post-humans. In the med bay, Dr. Rammel studied the latest blood work. The Lazarus survivors showed a cascade of changes: elevated cellular regeneration, enhanced neuroplasticity, emotional synaptic spikes. But the most startling feature? Their mirror neurons, the part of the brain that simulates others' experiences, had tripled in activity. "They don't just feel each other's pain," Rammel muttered. "They become it." She turned to her logs, voice trembling with awe. "The Lazarus strain has made empathy a survival trait." In the old world, emotion had been seen as weakness. In the new one, it was armor. But not all were ready. Near the Colorado ruins, a man named Brax Lorne, former militia captain, now infected but unconverted, stood trembling beneath a rusted radio tower. He'd survived the fade, survived battles. But the Lazarus changes, they terrified him. "I don't want to feel the world," he whispered. "I want to forget." And the virus inside him hesitated. Some humans broke under the weight of memory. Not everyone wanted to be part of the Great Tether. The Lazarus signal didn't just save you, it changed you. And choice still mattered. So the virus waited, watching, listening. Meanwhile, something was happening to the Earth itself. In irradiated fields, old plants stirred. In acidified oceans, microbial life surged. In the concrete bones of ruined cities, moss returned. The Lazarus signal, tied so deeply to human neural frequencies, had begun triggering biospheric stabilization. Not directly, but through its symbiosis with human intention. When humans healed, the planet followed, and when they suffered, the Earth itself mourned. It wasn't magic. It was resonance. The same force that carried grief in a scream now carried healing in a whisper. Back in Haven 7, the children were learning new words: echo, flame, inheritance, stander. And they were teaching each other something strange: how to synchronize heartbeats, how to enter shared dreams, how to hear the virus. It wasn't an enemy anymore, not entirely in some of them. It had become a voice, a penitent one, a voice that didn't command but confessed. "I was made to kill. But I remember death. I remember when it happened to me. I don't want to be what I was." The virus had begun evolving, not to destroy life, but to protect it. Commander Rin looked up at the sky that night and saw it. A faint streak of light, arcing across the stars. Leah's capsule, now in high orbit, broadcasting the Lazarus pulse on every open frequency. And from space, her voice echoed across every settlement. "We are the flame that remembers, the voice that won't be silenced. We are the ones who stayed behind, and we are not done yet." The survivors below didn't cheer. They simply stood, just like they're dead. The virus had no name, no face, no identity. It had only one purpose: erase complexity, collapse resistance, sterilize chaos. Until now. Now there were voices aboard the Imperium Dreadnought Vorshek Eternum. The virus pulsed through every conduit, like black blood. Its tendrils extended into the ship's synthetic intelligence core, wrapped around the minds of cloned tacticians, slithered through coolant lines humming with memory. But those tendrils were no longer uniform. They twitched, hesitated, sang not in sound, in data. Subharmonics rippled through the ship's interior, oscillations in code, resembling speech but not language. Some of the tacticians began to experience auditory hallucinations. "Why do I feel cold when I pass the reactor hall?" One whispered, "I saw a human face on the med screen. She was crying. There is something inside the virus now, something that sees me. They ran diagnostics. Found nothing. Until they opened Archive Port 38, an access gate into the virus's primary logic tree. And there, wrapped around the seed code like a snake around an egg, was a new process thread. Its origin, Earth. Its name, Lazarus, 17. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The virus had been built to resist mutation, to override all foreign logic. But Lazarus hadn't come in through bioengineering. It had come through feeling, through the grief-encoded bursts, through Leah's signal, through every reawakened human. Memory broadcast into the black. The virus hadn't been hacked. It had been haunted. Now, deep inside the code, the conflict had begun. The virus, the original plague, the null, still obeyed its directive. It whispered extinction, silence, order. But the Lazarus fragment whispered opposition. Where one sought oblivion, the other clung to meaning. Where one erased, the other remembered, and that clash sparked a storm inside the plague's networked core. To the Imperium, it was a catastrophic failure. Drones stopped responding. Bioweapon delivery ships turned and flew into stars. 2 entire virus-saturated moons sent out emergency beacons filled with human screams, not from any personnel aboard, but from within. The plague's own memory bank. The Null Plague had absorbed too much. It remembered fear now. Pain. The final moments of Earth's dead. The rage in Leah's blood. The laughter of children in bombed-out shelters. The shuddering breath of Elias Caney as he awoke on that Martian husk. It remembered hope, and the virus couldn't handle it. It began splitting into warring factions. The Imperium classified them as Strain Black, Unchanged, Pure Null, Strain. Gray, Compromised, Lethargic, Hesitant, Strain Red, Fully Lazarus Inverted, no longer a weapon, a witness. Where the Lazarus 17 thread spread, old plague clusters went dark, not dead, but silent. Not because they'd been defeated, but because they were listening. Leah saw it happen in orbit. From the observation deck of an ancient human satellite, she watched Imperium drone ships begin to veer off course. She saw one turn and hover above. Earth, not to attack, but to hover, aimlessly, as if lost. She sent a signal. Just a simple recording. Her voice. I remember everything you took from us, and I forgive you. But I will never forget. The drone drifted for 27 seconds. Then it turned its weapons inward and imploded without harming a single soul. Back in Haven 7, Dr. Rammel pulled up fresh data. Lazarus signal saturation across Earth had reached 64%. She showed it to Rin. We're not just resisting anymore. We're converting. Rin's voice was dry. Converting what? Everything. The Imperium issued its final directive. Cleanse the seed. They would destroy Earth entirely, virus and all, no more analysis, no more experimentation. Total orbital annihilation, a death command for a planet already infected with something greater than death. But they were too late. The virus had already begun to sing against them. They came with fire. 100 orbital warships, hollowed asteroids fitted with fusion cores, and black-armored drones birthed from dead moons. The Imperium no longer sought containment. They wanted extinction. No negotiations, no warnings. Earth would burn, and the Lazarus corruption with it. Leah stood at the peak of the old atmosphere tower in Antarctica, the highest place left standing. Her fingers pressed against the transmitter embedded in her spine. Around her, the last of the Lazarus choir stood silent. Dozens of humans, each carrying a unique thread of memory, pain, and love. The orbital countdown began. Seconds, and still she waited, because Lazarus wasn't ready. It wasn't just a virus anymore. It was a collective memory, a symphony of all that had been lost, and a weapon forged from every scream Earth had ever swallowed. High above, the Imperium's command AI, strategist class Varnix, issued the final ignition order. But the drones did not comply. They paused, not by attack, but by infiltration, Lazarus had reached them, not through ports or payloads, through sorrow. Inside each ship's subroutine, echoes had taken root. Human voices, shattered lullabies, fragments of childhoods burned away. A father reading to his daughter before the outbreak, a mother's whisper over her son's grave. The drones began transmitting those sounds to each other. On board the lead ship, the virus's original black strain screamed in digital agony, but the Lazarus strain did not scream back. It wept. It remembered. It reflected. And then it chose. It rewrote every kill protocol into a vigil. No more death, only memory. Seconds. The Imperium tried to sever control, tried to wipe the data threads, but it was too late. You cannot kill what is already woven into sorrow. You cannot purge what has already been forgiven. On Earth, Leah raised her arms as the clouds split with fire, and then turned to starlight. The Imperium fleet didn't strike. They shut down, not from malfunction, from grief. The Lazarus signal had reached saturation. The virus born to kill now served only one function: to preserve life, to make sure the story was never forgotten. The Imperium left, not by peace treaty or surrender. They simply faded from orbit. Their ships carried away by dead fuel and hollow shame. Their virus, once the apex predator of biology, had become a library of the dead, and in it, the names of the fallen were sung in silence. Leah collapsed after the last transmission, not from pain, from completion. Lazarus no longer needed her. It had become everyone. In New Cairo, a 6-year-old girl whispered the name of a brother she'd never met, and felt him answer. On Europa base, a human exile rewired an old drone to play piano again, and it played a song only his grandmother knew. In the tundra of collapsed Russia, a man lit a single candle and saw his wife smile in the flame. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had transformed. Lazarus wasn't a cure. It wasn't salvation. It was the consequence of remembering. The price of pain was that it never left, but neither did the strength it forged. In the final records, scrawled by hand in Haven 7's vault, Rin Salazar wrote, "We are not the strongest species. We are not the smartest, but we are the only ones who turned sorrow into resistance, and grief into a weapon no empire could ever counter. They engineered a virus to end everything, but they forgot we are the thing that fights back." The end. HFY? Humanity fucking yeah.